Dream Travel to Italy. Chapter 1. Eli didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he was gazing out of his apartment window at the silent hum of the city lights, and the next, there was silence. A different kind. Crisp, like mountain air. He opened his eyes and found himself sitting beneath a sun-dappled olive tree, its branches swaying gently in a breeze that carried the scent of thyme and wildflowers. He was no longer in his room. This wasn't home. This was Italy. The hills rolled out like soft waves of green velvet, and far off in the distance, stone villages clung to the cliffs as if they had grown there themselves. Birds chirped softly in the distance. There was a golden hue to everything, like the world had been brushed with honey and dusted with the warmth of a fading sun. Eli stood, brushing a few olive leaves from his shoulders. His clothes had changed too, his hoodie replaced with a light linen shirt and well-worn sandals. It felt right, as if the land itself had dressed him for the journey ahead. A narrow stone path twisted through the grove, and with nowhere else to go and no reason to stay, he began to walk. As he wandered, he noticed little details, rustling lizards darting across warm rocks, the hum of bees in rosemary bushes, and terracotta rooftops peeking over cypress trees. It was peaceful, impossibly so. He felt as though the worries of the waking world were miles, no, entire dimensions, away. A weathered wooden sign appeared beside the path. It read Benvenuto a Toscana. Welcome to Tuscany. He smiled. Minutes or maybe hours later, time didn't seem to apply here, he reached a small hilltop town, all cobbled alleys and sunlit windows. The buildings were warm with age, and flower boxes spilled geraniums like laughter. An old woman sat knitting on her stoop. She looked up, as if she had been expecting him. "Ciao, Eli," she said with a knowing nod. "You're just in time for supper." He didn't ask how she knew his name. He didn't ask how he had arrived. In dreams, the need for answers fades like morning mist. She led him inside a stone cottage filled with the smell of bread, herbs, and stories. A long table was laid out beneath wooden beams, glowing in the soft flicker of candlelight. Bowls of olives, cheese, and fresh pasta lined the table like a celebration. Others joined, faces kind and unfamiliar, yet somehow comforting. They spoke in gentle Italian, occasionally turning to him with a smile or warm touch on the shoulder. Eli didn't need to understand the language to feel the meaning behind their words. This was welcome. This was belonging. As night settled, they stepped out to the terrace, the stars awakening one by one in the indigo sky. Below them, the valleys glowed with golden dots, faraway homes, quiet lives being lived. The old woman handed him a glass of deep red wine, and as he sipped, she said, "You'll travel far, Eli. But remember, every step is a return." He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. That night, Eli lay beneath the stars on a hammock strung between two olive trees. The wind carried the soft notes of a mandolin from somewhere distant, and his eyes fluttered closed. The journey had begun. Chapter 2, the scent of salt filled the air, and Eli awoke to the sound of lapping water. The olive groves were gone. So was the hilltop village. Now, he lay gently cradled in a wooden gondola drifting through narrow canals, the sky above a soft lavender. Around him rose old buildings, their foundations dipping into the water like tired giants resting their feet. Stone balconies leaned forward with flowering vines, and every window flickered with warm candlelight. Venice. A gondolier stood at the back of the boat, face half hidden beneath a smooth white mask. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat and a red sash at his waist. Without saying a word, he guided the gondola forward, the oar slicing the water in a steady rhythm. Eli sat up, the boat rocking gently beneath him. The water was so still it mirrored the buildings perfectly, as if the city floated on sky. Time seemed suspended, the world hushed except for the soft splash of water and the occasional coo of doves nesting above. They passed beneath arched bridges where couples whispered dreams to each other. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting golden circles that danced on the canal walls. Eli saw another gondola pass, its passengers wearing elaborate carnival masks, plumes and gold leaf and curved beaks that hid every expression. The City of Masks was not just a nickname, it was a spirit. The boat came to a stop beside a marble landing, and the gondolier gestured for Eli to step off. Before Eli could ask where he was or what to do, the gondola drifted silently back into the fog, vanishing like a breath. He wandered through the alleys, the narrow stone paths twisting unpredictably like veins through a living thing. Soft music echoed from somewhere, violin, accordion, laughter. He turned a corner and arrived in a vast square where masked dancers spun in circles beneath string lights. The square shimmered as if part of a dream within a dream. A woman in a golden dress approached him, her mask shaped like the sun. "Eli," she said softly, her voice like the wind through silk, "would you care to dance?" He hesitated, but only for a moment. Her hand found his, and together they joined the rhythm, spinning slowly beneath a sky so dark and vast it seemed to stretch beyond all known worlds. Around them, masked strangers clapped and turned, colors blending like brushstrokes on a canvas. As the music slowed, she leaned in and whispered, "Venice reveals what the heart hides. What is it you seek?" "I'm not sure," Eli replied. She touched the center of his chest with a gloved hand. "You will be." Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she faded into the crowd. The lights dimmed, the masks stilled, and silence returned. Eli wandered until he reached the edge of the lagoon, where the city gave way to open water. The stars were reflected perfectly on the surface. He looked out, and something shimmered, an island in the distance, cloaked in mist. As he watched, a small boat bobbed near the shore, waiting. With calm certainty, he stepped aboard. The boat drifted onward without sails or oars, pulled gently toward the next dream. As the sound of bells chimed from somewhere in the distance, Eli closed his eyes. The journey continued. Chapter 3. When Eli opened his eyes, the sea was gone. In its place stood marble. Endless, timeless marble. Giant columns rose around him like stone trees, casting long shadows across sun-warmed stone. The scent of history filled the air, dust, cypress, and worn parchment. Overhead, gulls circled lazily, their calls echoing across broken archways. He was in Rome. But not the Rome of tourist maps and buzzing scooters. This was a Rome whispered into being by memory and myth. The streets were quiet, but alive. The ruins shimmered slightly in the golden light, not broken but suspended, like the city was dreaming of its own past. Eli walked slowly through the forum, the worn stones beneath his feet warm and smooth. Statues lined the path, some headless, others faded, but all grand. He could almost hear them speaking in ancient tongues, voices like wind and thunder. He passed under an archway that read SPQR, and the letters pulsed for a moment, as if they recognized him. A guide appeared, a man in a toga, with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "You walk through the bones of empires," he said, gesturing to the vast ruins. "But bones remember. Touch them, and they speak." Eli followed him through winding streets, where ancient columns leaned against modern cafes, and stray cats basked in sunbeams like Roman nobles reborn. They reached the Colosseum, half-shadowed in the late afternoon light. Eli stood in awe, the arena stretching high above him like a giant's crown. The guide's voice turned solemn. "Here, dreams of glory met reality. And still, it stands." Inside, silence filled the vast space. Eli imagined the roar of 1,000 spectators, the thunder of hooves, the clash of iron. But beneath that noise, he sensed something deeper, a stillness. A reminder. That even greatness passes. That everything grand was once a thought, a whisper. "Grazie," Eli said, smiling. "You're welcome," she replied in perfect English. "Rome remembers everyone who passes through. Even you." "How do you know me?" he asked. She just shrugged and ran off, disappearing behind a hedge. The sun was sinking now, casting long shadows that made the buildings look even older. Yet nothing felt decayed. Rome, in this dream, wasn't a relic. It was eternal, ever transforming, ever watching. As Eli walked toward the Palatine Hill, the earth beneath his feet began to hum. Not a sound, but a pulse. Like the heartbeat of time itself. He climbed, and at the top, he turned to see the whole city unfurl below him, domes and rooftops, spires and fountains, ruins and roads, all blending into one timeless tapestry. The guide turned to him and said, "You seek meaning. But meaning is not in the monuments. It's in the quiet between steps." Eli nodded. He didn't fully understand yet, but his heart did. The last rays of sun slipped behind the distant horizon. A warm breeze wrapped around him like a cloak. Somewhere below, the fountains of Piazza Navona began to sing their watery lullabies. As Eli closed his eyes, the city pulsed softly, a lullaby in stone. He was ready for what came next. Chapter 4. Eli awoke to the smell of warm bread and paint. He found himself standing in a quiet street lined with amber-hued buildings, their shutters cracked open to let in the morning sun. The cobblestones beneath his feet were wet from an early rain, but the skies above were clear, a soft blue canvas brushed with streaks of rose and gold. He had arrived in Florence. The city felt like a whisper of music made visible, everything carefully placed, harmonized. As he wandered, Eli passed artisan workshops where sculptors carved marble into delicate fingers, and tiny cafes where older men sipped espresso as if time had no demands. Church bells rang gently through the air, not loud, but resonant, like an invitation to stillness. He followed a winding path toward the river, where the Arno sparkled like liquid glass. Bridges arched over it, most notably the Ponte Vecchio, a centuries-old corridor crowded with jewelers and golden trinkets. The bridge gleamed in the morning light, a necklace strung across the water. A young man stood at the center of the bridge, painting furiously, canvas propped on a crooked easel. His curls were wild, and splashes of color marked his fingers and clothes. "You've come at the perfect moment," the artist said without turning. "The light is just beginning to bloom." Eli watched the man's brush dance across the canvas, one stroke, then another, capturing the city not as it looked, but as it felt. Warm. Alive. Eternal. "Florence doesn't paint with colors," the man said, pausing to wipe his hands on his apron. "It paints with light. See for yourself." The artist handed Eli a folded map, blank at first glance, but as sunlight touched the paper, faint lines shimmered to life. Streets. Towers. Gardens. Paths of wonder. And glowing softly in the center, Il Duomo. Eli followed the trail, cool. Sacred. Timeless. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting the marble floor with color. As he looked up at the inner dome, he saw painted scenes of heaven and earth, angels and stars, light and shadow. He felt so small. And yet, infinite. A voice echoed from beside him. To build something eternal, one must begin with wonder. Eli turned to see a woman in a simple white dress, her eyes reflecting the same colors as the windows. "You are collecting pieces," she said gently. "Each place leaves something inside you. Don't forget to look within." She placed a small item in his hand, a glass pendant, shaped like a tear, catching the light with every hue of sunrise. "For the dark places," she whispered. He nodded, unsure if he was still awake. As dusk fell over Florence, Eli climbed the hill of Piazzale Michelangelo, where the entire city stretched before him. Rooftops, spires, the river, the dome. All glowing beneath the painted sky. The artist from the bridge was there again, still painting. "Did you find the light?" he asked. Eli looked out and felt it, not on the skyline, but in his chest. A quiet radiance. "I think it found me," Eli replied. And as the city dimmed and stars blinked awake, Eli leaned back in the warm grass, the pendant glowing faintly at his neck. Sleep found him like a final brushstroke. Chapter 5. The scent of lemon blossoms drifted on the breeze as Eli opened his eyes to soft waves brushing against stone. He was standing on a balcony carved into a cliff, overlooking a turquoise sea that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Below him, pastel-colored houses cascaded down the mountainside like petals spilling into the water. This was the Amalfi Coast. Warm air touched his face, salted and sweet. To his right, bougainvillea vines climbed the walls, their deep magenta flowers vivid against cream stucco. To his left, a narrow stairway curved downward, inviting him into the heart of a sunlit village. He descended. The path wound between homes painted in cheerful shades of coral and gold, their doors wide open, letting out the sounds of clinking dishes and distant singing. Life here didn't move fast. It meandered, like the stairways, like the waves. He passed a small shop where an old man was arranging lemons the size of grapefruits into a wooden crate. "Buongiorno," the man called out. "A gift from the sun, these lemons. Take one. They bring clarity." Eli accepted the offering, the fruit warm in his hand and fragrant like summer. He continued downward until the village opened to a quiet square, where a woman with silver hair served drinks under an orange tree. "Sit, traveler," she said, placing a glass of chilled limoncello in front of him. "You've been walking far. The sea teaches us how to rest." Eli took a sip. It was sweet, then sharp. Like a memory that stung before it soothed. He sat in silence as life unfolded around him, children chasing pigeons, an artist sketching rooftops, waves folding softly into the marina. And above it all, the cliffs stood tall and patient, like time itself was leaning against them. Later, he wandered toward a path carved into the mountainside. It was quiet now. The village slowly gave way to pine trees and terraces of vineyards. The air cooled, and the distant hush of waves was joined by birdsong. He came upon a small chapel, its white facade tucked into the stone like a secret. Inside, candles flickered beneath a mosaic of stars and seashells. A woman knelt at the altar, then turned to him with eyes full of calm. "You are not lost," she said softly. "You're unraveling." Her words settled into him like a tide coming in. "Rest here," she continued, gesturing to a bench by the window. "Let the sea speak. It knows things even the stars forget." Eli sat. From the window, he saw the coastline stretch like a sleeping dragon, villages glowing softly against the hills. The sun dipped toward the horizon, dyeing the sea in molten gold. The waves whispered secrets he couldn't quite understand, but didn't need to. He took the lemon from his pocket and rolled it between his palms. Something about its simplicity felt profound. A fruit. A moment. A breath. As twilight fell, the village bells rang out, a lullaby for the coast. Eli closed his eyes, the ocean's rhythm syncing with his own heartbeat. And once again, the dream pulled him onward. Chapter 6. The sun rose softly over the sea as Eli opened his eyes to a sky streaked with blush and amber. He was perched on the edge of a high cliff path, surrounded by the scent of morning dew and jasmine. To one side, terraced vineyards rippled down the mountainside in green waves. To the other, the Mediterranean shimmered like glass, calmly stretching far beyond where sight could follow. Far below, 5 villages clung to the coastline like jewels sewn into the hem of the earth. Buildings in hues of rose, saffron, lavender, and seafoam leaned into one another, their colors glowing in the soft light. This was Cinque Terre. Eli stood, the gravel beneath his sandals crunching lightly. A wooden sign beside him pointed to the Sentiero Azzurro, the blue path, linking the 5 towns by foot. There was no one else in sight. Only birdsong, the occasional rustle of vines, and the rhythmic whisper of the sea. He began to walk. Each step was easy, unhurried. The trail wound past lemon groves and stone walls, occasionally ducking into shady tunnels of olive trees. The silence wasn't empty, it was sacred, filled with quiet stories carried on the wind. He reached the first town, Rio Maggiore, as it was just waking up. Fishermen hauled nets from sleepy boats. Laundry flapped from balconies like flags of everyday life. A child laughed, chasing a cat around a sun-warmed alley. No one asked who he was. He was simply part of the morning. He bought a fig tart from a woman with a basket and ate it slowly as he watched the boats bob gently in the harbor. Then, without needing to decide, his feet led him to the next town, Manarola. Here, time slowed even more. The buildings were nestled tighter, the cliffs steeper. A narrow path led him to a ledge where lovers had carved their names into the stone. He traced the worn initials with his fingers. There, on the rail, was a small rusted padlock with two names scratched in, Amato e Luz. Someone had loved here. Deeply. Quietly. Forever. Further along the trail, a stone bench overlooked the sea. A man sat there, sketching with charcoal on rough paper. He didn't look up as Eli approached but spoke softly. "People come here to connect," he said. "With others. With the sea. With themselves." Eli sat beside him. They watched the light shift on the water, creating golden paths that led to nowhere in particular. The man continued, "Sometimes we think we're broken, when really, we're just scattered. Walking helps you find the pieces." Eli nodded, understanding more with each silent mile. He continued along the cliffs, the villages unfolding like chapters in a peaceful story. Corniglia, perched high above the sea like a secret, Vernazza, full of flowers and quiet song, and finally, Monterrasso, where the beach stretched wide and the mountains exhaled into the horizon. By the time the sun dipped toward the waves, Eli had walked through all 5 villages, but what he carried was more than distance. It was presence. Stillness. A sense of being part of something simple and enduring. He sat on the rocks by the shore, waves brushing against his feet. Nearby, someone had left a line of stones balanced one atop the other, each a little miracle of gravity and trust. Eli smiled. He added one more stone to the top. It held. The day faded into indigo. Stars blinked into place, reflected in the tidal pool beside him. With the rhythm of the waves lulling his mind, he let himself drift again, not away, but inward. The dream continued, quietly stitched with light and sea. Chapter 7. Eli opened his eyes to a soft, golden mist curling over the surface of a still lake. The air was crisp, touched with morning chill and the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke. A single boat glided across the mirror-smooth water, leaving behind the gentlest ripple. Around the lake, emerald hills cradled sleepy villages and sun-dappled villas with terracotta roofs. He had arrived at Lake Como. Eli sat on the edge of an old stone dock, his reflection rippling beneath him. Above, the mountains held their breath, the world wrapped in an almost sacred silence. Somewhere nearby, a clock tower chimed, once, twice, 3 times, its sound echoing across the stillness. Then, the faint ticking. He turned to see an old man sitting on a bench nearby, working intently on a pocket watch. Tools were laid out carefully beside him on a velvet cloth. Dozens of other watches, some antique, some modern, some fantastical, hung from a tree branch above like silver fruit. The man didn't look up. "Time behaves differently here," he said, his fingers adjusting a gear no larger than a grain of rice. "Some moments stretch like summers. Others vanish before you even feel them." Eli approached. The man handed him a watch. It wasn't running, its hands frozen at 11:11. The glass face was slightly cracked, but through it, Eli saw not gears, but images. Flickering memories. A table in Tuscany. A masked dance in Venice. Painted light in Florence. Laughter by the Amalfi Cliffs. Quiet steps in Cinque Terre. "It shows you what you carry," the man said, voice soft as the lapping water. "But not what's coming." Eli held the watch to his ear. Silence. "Time waits here," the old man whispered. "For you to breathe. So Eli did. He wandered the lakeside path, through gardens blooming with azaleas and roses. Butterflies drifted between the petals, and swans glided over the lake like whispered thoughts. Locals greeted him with warm smiles and soft nods, as if they recognized the quiet in his eyes. He found himself drawn to a small cafe shaded by weeping willows. The waitress brought him a pot of chamomile tea without asking. On the saucer was a single shortbread cookie, shaped like a clock. "Everyone has their own hour," she said gently. "You'll know when it's yours." He sat there a long time, watching time itself slow to a hush. Couples strolled past arm in arm. A dog napped in a patch of sun. A child floated a paper boat in a fountain. No rush. No worry. Later, as twilight painted the lake in rose and violet, Eli returned to the watchmaker. The man handed back the pocket watch. Its hands now moved, slow and steady, ticking forward with a sound like a soft heartbeat. "You've begun to feel it," he said. "The now. What am I supposed to do with it?" Eli asked. "Hold it," the man replied, "but don't grip too tightly. Let time pass through you, not around you." Eli slipped the watch into his pocket. It pulsed faintly, warm, alive. Night fell gently over the lake. The stars reflected perfectly on the surface, like a second sky below his feet. A small ferry waited at the dock, its lantern glowing like a firefly in the dark. Without hesitation, Eli stepped aboard. The lake shimmered goodbye. And in the stillness, a single moment unfolded endlessly, whole and complete. Chapter 8. The hum of crickets greeted Eli as his eyes opened to the scent of pine, sage, and warm earth. He was surrounded by rolling hills blanketed in forest, fields of sunflowers bowing gently in the breeze, and sleepy stone farmhouses rising like secrets from the land. This was Umbria, the green heart of Italy. Above him, the sky was deep and endless, dotted with drifting clouds that cast slow-moving shadows across the valley. Everything here moved gently, like a lullaby held in soil and leaf. He began walking, his feet finding a dirt path that wound through olive groves and tall cypress trees. Birds called softly from the branches. A nearby stream whispered beside him, its waters so clear they shimmered like glass over pebbles. At the edge of a hill, Eli spotted a town tucked among the slopes. It was small, built of weathered stone, its rooftops rust-colored and moss-softened. Bells rang from a chapel tower, not to call, but to remind. Time here wasn't a march. It was a quiet rhythm, like the breath of the land itself. As he entered the town, a woman with sun-dusted skin waved from a wooden stall lined with baskets of mushrooms, honey, and dried lavender. "You've come for the lantern," she said, smiling. Eli tilted his head. "What lantern?" Her eyes twinkled. "The one you carry but haven't yet lit." She handed him a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside was an old brass lantern, dented but beautiful, with intricate carvings of vines and stars. It was empty, no flame, no wick. But somehow, it felt full. "Where do I light it?" he asked. She simply pointed upward. He followed a winding path through the village and up a steep slope where the forest grew thicker and the air cooler. Along the way, he passed painted shutters, laundry fluttering in silence, and a single child drawing suns with chalk on the stones. At the hill's crest stood an ancient stone monastery, worn by time but glowing in the golden hour light. Ivy crept along its sides, and the scent of rosemary hung in the air. Inside, it was quiet. No monks. No chants. Just silence thick enough to feel. He wandered through a long hall until he reached a courtyard open to the sky. There, in the center, sat a small fire. No fuel. No smoke. Just light. It flickered with colors he'd never seen, blue, violet, gold. As Eli approached, the lantern in his hands warmed. He knelt, held it near the flame, and watched as it slowly caught, not with fire, but with glow. A quiet, living glow that pulsed like a heartbeat, like memory, like hope. The lantern hummed softly in his hands. Not loud, but enough. A voice spoke, not aloud, but inside him. The light you seek is not for the path ahead. It's for the path within. Eli stood, holding the lantern close. Its glow illuminated more than shadows. It revealed thoughts he hadn't faced. Feelings he hadn't named. Longings he hadn't admitted. He didn't run from them. As night fell over the Umbrian hills, he walked back down to the village, the lantern swinging gently by his side. In its glow, every stone seemed warmer, every shadow gentler. The townspeople smiled as he passed. The woman at the stall gave him a small nod. "You've lit it," she said. "Now keep it lit." Eli reached a small inn near the stream, where a room waited, candle already flickering on the table. He set the lantern beside it. Both flames danced together, one from the world, one from within. As he slipped into bed, the air outside thick with the scent of herbs and night, Eli felt something shift. A kind of peace that came not from finding answers, but from being still enough to hear the questions. And once more, he dreamed forward. Chapter 9. Eli stepped into a city of soft stone and starlit balconies. The air was velvet, warm, perfumed with night blossoms and the faint sweetness of wine. Verona greeted him with the hush of late evening, its streets lit by old lanterns casting gold halos on worn cobblestones. The city shimmered like a memory half remembered, both ancient and alive. He stood before a stone archway carved with roses and script. Above it, in delicate cursive, the words, "Benvenuto al Teatro del Cuore." Welcome to the Theater of the Heart. Beyond the archway, the city unfolded in quiet elegance, shuttered windows, ivy-laced balconies, the faint hum of a violin echoing through a nearby square. Couples strolled slowly, fingers intertwined, their voices soft as lullabies. Here, Verona did not shout its romance, it whispered it. Drawn by something unseen, Eli turned down a narrow alley and entered a courtyard overgrown with vines and quiet magic. There, on the far wall, love letters had been tucked between the stones, hundreds of them. Some faded, some fresh, written in every language, each sealed with hope. He stepped closer. One note fluttered down like a leaf and landed at his feet. It read simply, "Love does not wait to be understood. It asks only to be felt." A gentle voice behind him said, "Even the heart gets lost sometimes." He turned to see a woman seated beneath a pomegranate tree. Her dress was soft, her gaze thoughtful, her hands cupping a candle that glowed without wind. "Who are you?" Eli asked. She smiled. "A reflection of something you once believed in." She stood and walked toward the center of the courtyard, where two old marble benches faced each other like patient listeners. "Verona remembers lovers," she said. "But not all love is about another. Sometimes it's about returning to yourself." Eli sat beside her, and silence settled between them, not awkward, but full. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a weathered book of sonnets. "Words like these don't last because they're perfect," she said, tracing a line with her finger. "They last because they ache." He listened as she read a passage aloud. The words floated in the air, lingering like candle smoke. He didn't try to memorize them, he let them move through him, softening corners he hadn't realized were hard. Later, they wandered through Piazza del Erbi, where the market had long closed but the spirit of trade and tale remained. A musician played under a lamppost. A couple danced slowly, shoes barely lifting off the stones. A fountain bubbled like laughter in the corner. Eli and the woman paused at a balcony. Familiar. Famous. It was Juliet's. Lit from below, the balcony looked less like legend, more like longing. A place not of fairy tales, but of feeling. "I used to think love needed to be loud," she said. "But maybe it's more like this." "Quiet?" Eli asked. "Present," she answered. As the stars brightened overhead, the woman handed him a folded page from her book. A poem, unfinished. Write your own ending, she said. And then, she faded into the starlight, like a breath exhaled from a dream. Eli stood alone beneath the balcony, heart open in a way he hadn't expected. He unfolded the paper. The final line was blank. He wrote nothing. Not yet. Instead, he looked up at the sky, at stars as ancient as Verona's stories, and breathed in a truth beyond words. That night, he slept beneath the trees, with the soft hush of sonnets rustling in the leaves and the moon watching silently above. Chapter 10. Cold kissed Eli's cheeks as he opened his eyes to the scent of pine and snow. The landscape around him was stark and breathtaking, a jagged crown of pale mountains stretching into the sky, their peaks brushed in white and gold. Shadows pooled in the valleys, while sunlight danced across icy ridges. This was the Dolomites. The world here was quiet in a different way. Not gentle, but vast. Every breath felt cleaner. Every sound, wind, bird call, the soft crunch of snow, was amplified by the silence. Eli stood at the edge of a wide alpine meadow. Tall larches bowed in the wind. Far above, an eagle circled like a sentinel. A narrow trail wound upward between sharp cliffs and frozen streams, and something in his chest stirred. Not fear. Not urgency. But reverence. He began to climb. Hours, or what felt like them, passed in stillness. The higher he went, the thinner the air became, yet his steps grew lighter. The lantern from Umbria swung gently at his hip, glowing faintly even in the cold light. It gave no warmth, but somehow, it steadied him. Midway up a frozen path, he met a man tending a small fire beside a wooden shelter. His coat was stitched from furs and feathers. His beard was silver, his eyes sharp and kind, like someone who had watched many winters come and go. "You've come far," the man said, offering him a seat by the fire. "I think I'm still going," Eli replied. The man nodded. Mountains don't give answers. But they strip away everything that isn't one. They sat in silence for a time, watching the fire crackle, listening to the wind run its fingers through the trees. The man handed Eli a small piece of obsidian, smooth and black, carved into a spiral. "Hold this when you reach the summit," he said. "It shows not what's ahead, but what's beneath." Eli took it, feeling its cool weight in his palm, and continued upward. The trail narrowed. Snow deepened. Clouds brushed the cliffs like drifting thoughts. Just as his legs began to tire, the path opened into a high plateau, white and endless, with a single stone structure in the center. A circle of monoliths. He stepped inside. No roof. No doors. Just open sky above, and stone all around. In the center was a pedestal, dusted with frost. Eli placed the obsidian spiral on it. At first, nothing happened. Then, the wind shifted. The clouds parted. Light poured down from above like a spotlight from the heavens. The spiral glowed, and the lantern beside him pulsed brighter. Voices rose, not in words, but in feeling. "You are more than the places you've been. You are the thread that ties them. Not just a traveler, but a vessel. A mirror. A maker." Eli closed his eyes. He saw every place again, Tuscany's fields, Venice's canals, Rome's ruins, the quiet of Florence, the cliffs of Amalfi, the lantern in Umbria, the unfinished poem in Verona. And beneath them all, himself. Whole. Quiet. Real. When he opened his eyes, the wind had stilled. The light had faded. But he felt no cold. Only clarity. He descended the mountain slowly, watching as the world below expanded like a painted scroll. The firekeeper was gone, but a warm mug of something spiced sat beside the shelter. A final gift. Eli drank deeply, then continued onward. The Dolomites receded behind him, towering and eternal, their silence echoing with truths too vast for words. Chapter 11. When Eli opened his eyes, the hush of mountains had been replaced by a different rhythm, quicker, pulsing. A city's heartbeat. The gentle thrum of footsteps on pavement, bicycles gliding by, the distant ring of trams. But even here, the dream was softened. The sounds were not loud, they were layered, warm, and woven like threads in a rich tapestry. This was Milan. Skyscrapers of glass stood beside palaces of stone. Fashioned marble kissed weathered brick. 1,000 years of ambition moved alongside the present moment, and yet, something still waited in stillness. Eli walked through wide avenues and narrow alleys. There was beauty in everything, window displays lit like art, children feeding pigeons in sunlit plazas, an old man sketching with charcoal outside a library. Milan moved, but it didn't rush. Eventually, he reached the Duomo, a great cathedral of spires and lace-cut stone. It rose like a frozen flame into the sky. But today, it felt quieter. People gathered outside, watching as soft petals fell from nearby trees, blown gently by the spring wind. Inside, sunlight poured through stained glass, tinting the silence with color. Eli stood beneath the vaulted ceilings, listening, not to sermons, but to breath. His own. The stillness of others. The long, low note of a single bell. In one of the side chapels, he noticed a small door tucked behind an iron gate. It was open. He stepped through. Beyond the door was a garden, hidden within the stone. Ivy curled around archways. A pond rippled beside marble statues. Orange trees leaned into one another like old friends. It was untouched, unseen by the busy world outside. A sanctuary. He sat on a bench beside a bush of blooming lavender. The air was thick with fragrance. Insects buzzed lazily. The city was still just beyond the walls, but here, it felt like it had paused to breathe with him. A woman in a long coat and canvas satchel entered the garden, walking slowly. She carried a notebook, its cover worn from travel. When she saw Eli, she smiled and sat beside him. "You've come far," she said, echoing the words he'd heard before. But her voice held a tone different from the others, familiar, almost like his own. "I think I've been collecting pieces," Eli said softly. She nodded. "And now you're beginning to see the shape they form." She handed him the notebook. Inside were sketches of every place he'd been, done in charcoal and watercolor. Pages of Tuscany's fields, Venice's masks, Rome's arches, the hills of Florence, the cliffs of Amalfi, the lantern from Umbria, the stars of Verona, the mountains, the lake. And each image was accompanied by a single word. Presence. Wonder. Stillness. Return. He flipped to the last page. Blank. "You'll fill it," she said, standing slowly. "Not with places, but with what they've made of you." He looked up, but she was already gone, fading through the archway like a shadow at dusk. As the light began to dim, Eli sat quietly. He closed the notebook. He didn't feel rushed to write. The moment didn't ask for that. It only asked him to be here. For a long while, he remained in the garden. When he finally stood to leave, he noticed something glowing faintly at the edge of the pond, a small silver key resting on a stone. He picked it up, and somehow, he knew where it belonged. The journey was nearing its return. Chapter 12. The scent of salt and smoke filled the air as Eli opened his eyes to the southern breeze. He stood on a rooftop in Naples, the city sprawling below him in a symphony of color and life. Rooftops stacked like sun-baked puzzle pieces. Church domes, laundry lines, winding alleys. Mount Vesuvius loomed in the distance, silent but mighty, holding centuries of untold stories in its shadow. The key from Milan weighed gently in his pocket, cool, solid, and whispering with purpose. This city moved like fire and music, wild, honest, alive. Horns honked below, children chased each other between fruit stalls, and motorbikes wove through the chaos like dancers. It was raw, unpolished, real. Eli descended narrow staircases, passing chipped walls painted with saints and graffiti. Art, in Naples, was part of the noise. He wandered toward the Quartiere Spagnoli, where colors burst from balconies and every corner held the scent of fresh dough and espresso. A street musician played a mandolin with closed eyes, his song rising like a prayer above the noise. Eli dropped a coin into the case, and the man paused mid-note. "You carry a key," he said without looking. "But do you remember the door?" Eli hesitated. He didn't. The musician gestured toward a narrow alley lined with candles and crumbling brick. "It's down there. But only if you walk slowly enough to see it." Eli obeyed. As he moved deeper into the alley, time softened. The walls closed in like a tunnel of memory. Candlelight flickered on faded murals, images of faces that felt eerily familiar. A child playing in a field. A woman laughing under a fig tree. A man staring into the sea. Each one stirred something inside Eli, as though he had lived pieces of them in dreams he could not fully recall. At the very end of the alley stood a wooden door. It was old, weather-worn, moss gathering at the base. But in the center, there was a lock shaped like a sun. Around it, carved in looping script, were the words, "Return not to where you began, but to where you truly are." He reached for the key. It slid in smoothly, turned with a quiet click, and the door creaked open. Inside, he found a small stone chamber lit by dozens of hanging lanterns. Each one glowed with a different hue, soft greens, warm ambers, deep blues. At the center of the room was a shallow pool, its surface glass still, reflecting the ceiling like a mirrored sky. Eli stepped toward it. In the reflection, he didn't just see himself. He saw every version of him from the journey, walking through fields, standing beneath the Duomo, dancing in Venice, holding the lantern in Umbria. They weren't separate, they were one. From the side of the room, a quiet voice spoke. "Memory is not a collection. It's a reunion." He turned and saw no one. But he understood. The journey had not been about discovery. It had been about remembering. Not places, but pieces of himself. He knelt by the pool and placed the silver key on the stone beside it. The water shimmered, and the lanterns above dimmed, one by one, until only the soft blue one remained. Its glow reflected in his eyes. Then, the room gently dissolved, walls fading, light softening. He found himself back outside, standing on the edge of the sea. The sky had turned violet. Waves lapped at the shore, and the silhouette of Vesuvius stood against the dusk like a dream not yet finished. In the distance, a boat waited. The same boat that had carried him through Venice. The same one that had pulled him from sleep at the start. The journey was almost whole. He stepped aboard. The sea cradled him. The stars blinked awake. Chapter 13. The boat rocked gently as the world around Eli faded to gold. When his eyes opened, he was once again in Tuscany, in the same field where it had all begun. Morning light spilled over the hills, painting the wheat in hues of honey and fire. The air was rich with dew and wildflowers, and a soft breeze rustled the tall grass like a whisper from an old friend. He stood slowly, stretching as though from a long, restful sleep. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. The farmhouse still waited in the distance, its windows glowing with early sun. Birds circled lazily overhead. The same cypress trees lined the horizon. But the moment felt fuller, more alive. As though time had opened something wide inside him. In his pocket, the silver key was gone. So was the lantern. But in their place, there was peace. He began walking toward the farmhouse. The path was familiar now, the curve of the hill, the rhythm of his steps, the sound of bees drifting between blooms. Each detail felt like a reunion, like the last piece of a song returning to its first note. At the front steps of the house sat a weathered notebook. His. He opened it. The pages were no longer blank. They were filled with sketches, pressed flowers, charcoal scenes of every chapter, gondolas in moonlight, Roman ruins bathed in gold, the light of Florence, cliffs of Amalfi, stars over Verona, the Dolomite peaks. And on the final page, written in his own hand, a single sentence. I am here. He smiled. The farmhouse door opened on its own. Inside, the table was set with bread, cheese, olives, and a cup of warm tea that steamed gently in the golden light. A breeze moved through the open windows, carrying the scent of rosemary and old wood. He sat. Outside, the hills shifted with light. The world was quiet, not silent, but perfectly still in its rhythm. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every bird call, every sip of tea, was exactly where it belonged. Eli closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to feel. His journey had not been one of escape. It had been a return. To the places, yes, but more importantly, to himself. To the quiet. To presence. To that small, enduring light within. And now, in this final chapter, he wasn't dreaming. He was home. The end. Thank you for dreaming through Italy with Eli.